I was barely 15 when Vivekananda entered my life. Then there followed a revolution within, and everything was turned upside down. This is not me, this is Subhash Bose. I'll repeat that. I was barely 15 when Vivekananda entered my life. Then there followed a revolution within, and everything was turned upside down. I had barely turned over a few pages when I realized that here was something that I had been longing for. So, for those of you, I don't know, since I'm in the popular media, I may give you a few popular references. I don't know how many people are comfortable with that, but sometimes, there is this meme about a old scene, I think, from some show where there's a panel and there's a candidate on the other side, and there's this whole meme which plays ki tum ye ho, tumko pata nahi hai, lekin tum ye ho. So Vivekananda to some degree can be paraphrased as तुमको ये जरूरी है, तुमको पता नहीं है लेकिन जरूरी है तुम्हारे लिए. It's only when you begin picking up that you understand that this is something that you needed. And why I quote Subhash is because I relate to the life that Subhash lived after he began with Vivekananda. So when you look at somebody's end of life story and you say, well, they were somebody who had courage, who stood for what they wanted, who were willing to leave things. If nothing, Subhash left the Indian civil service, which is not an easy thing to leave in that era. But then you have to see what shaped that person's mind space, because we always see the execution, we do not see the philosophical bedrock of that execution. And I think Vivekananda is a man who instills in you, he seeds within your thought process, and then you can see the results of that coming through many, many decades of your life. It has impacted my life. So in a sort of a quasi-romantic philosophical sense, I relate to how it impacted Subhash's life. And that's why I refer to him often in that. Now I see many students here, people wearing school uniforms and so on and so forth. And that made me think of the period when I was struggling with my own dilemmas. And I think around 14 to 16, 14 to 17 was a phase when I was a very reflective individual in terms of random triggers of thought. For instance, you study in school that light travels at this pace, and you study that the star is so many light years away. And then I go back home and I look at the stars at night, and I'm thinking that this star is 30 light years away and I am 15. So the light I am seeing came before I was born, and there will be other stars whose light will come after I am dead. That's a very small time span to live. That light can come crossing your lifespan. Then I saw this series by Carl Sagan. He was a famous name, making very interesting documentaries on the cosmos, astronomy. And he summarized time. And he said that if the Earth started about 1 billion years ago, the Big Bang Theory, around that period, he said if you take all of time from the Big Bang Theory till now, basis scientific information of what timelines are, he said if you take the whole of cosmos as 1 year, December 31st, January 1st, that sequence, the Buddha comes in 5 seconds before midnight. So from the 1st of Jan till probably 30th of December, there is no mankind worth talking about. That means man himself is very, very small on this planet. So if man is that small, and my lifetime is that small, what exactly are we doing here in this time span? What can we afford to do? What do you think I'll conquer the world? The world is nothing, it goes like this. What will you conquer in it? You're too short here. Then I read in terms of, so teens are very emotional times sometimes. Your animosity is strong, your affection is strong. And I read this thing from Samuel Jackson saying, friendship between two mortals can be contracted on no other terms than one must at some time mourn for the other. And that's the early introduction to the inevitability of death. That either you will lose the people that you know or they will lose you. There is no way to have a permanent happily ever after. That doesn't exist. It's just cinematic selling for you. So in that period, and then what popular culture, and because I was living in, I'm North Indian, so I was watching Hindi cinema, I was listening to Hindi songs, and random things would stick in my head. So if I saw Devanand in Hum Dono, I would think, okay, मैं जिंदगी का साथ निभाता चला गया, बर्बादियों का जश्न मनाता चला गया. That seemed the contra thought. If I saw Pyasa, and he comes back at the end of it, I'm sure many of you would have seen that, when he comes back after he's declared dead, and he hears people and he says, ये दुनिया मिल भी जाए तो क्या है? That seemed interesting, but popular cinema was not selling that story to me. It was an aberration, that track. Then I had invested 600 rupees of my pocket money in the 1980s into buying a CD. A CD was a very costly thing when it came. And there's this album called Sajda. And Jagjit Singh would sing something, आदमी आदमी को क्या देगा, जो भी देगा वही खुदा देगा. So my popular universe is this, but I'm still confused about my life, my existence, and my struggle. And then, just like Subhash Bose, to repeat, I had barely turned a few pages when I realized that here was something that I had been longing for. So the bridge between my emotional requirement and my clarity began to come when I began to read Vivekanand. So while everybody here, while the event, while the activity, while the day is about the nation and Vivekanand, my aim is very entirely selfish. I wanted to heal myself, understand my mind. Till I do that, I cannot do anything for the nation. That is my perspective. And that is how Vivekananda enters my life. And then he begins to shape your thinking. And then you begin to read stretches of him, and they began to come and they began to correlate with what you have so far followed. So Vivekananda says, and these are things that I have kept for ages and years with me. There is success and failure in every work, but I'm inclined to believe that one who is a coward will after death be born as an insect or a worm. That there is no salvation for a coward even after millions of years of penance. This life is not, in my view, such a sweet thing that I would long to live through so much care and caution and fear. So loss of money or loss of anything else, I cannot bother about, and I will not. And that seems a very counterintuitive thought, because throughout, as you grow up, especially in middle class India, you are taught to acquire, to get something, to not be left behind. The culture of let things go is not something you naturally look at. You're an acquisitor. बेटा वो तुम्हारा सीट छूट गया, तुम्हारा जगह छूट गया, तुमसे कोई आगे चला गया. And this man says, I don't care what this life is not so important that you have to be that stealer for primacy every single day of your life. And in that universe, I also oscillated between, I remember at 15 or something saying to somebody, I'm an atheist because I don't understand religion. What is God? This doesn't mean, there's no logic to it. And that atheism is popular sometimes because being religious is not seen as being cool in youth. As a young person, if you're religious, that's relatively uncool. So it is easier to say, oh, I don't believe in all this. But then the fact that none of it has any larger picture doesn't make sense either. So you can't commit to being that side, that, oh, nothing matters, it's just biology, it's just organisms, you come and you go. On the other hand, conventional religion is also, frankly, not very inspiring for young people, because conventional religion teaches you to obey without questioning. It teaches you to do things because you're told to do things. And that's not what naturally a young mind relates to, at least my mind couldn't relate to. So I couldn't relate to the complete blind obedience of traditional religion. It was too oppressive, frankly, and it was for a man who was not able to question himself. So I remember a priest coming to our place and saying something to me that, beta, do this, and God loves you, he will take care of your health. And I said, Swamiji, for how long? He said, no, beta, he loves you, so you will be healthy and you will be fit. I said, I agree, Swamiji, but why is his love comes with the expiry date? Why does he not love somebody for the 200 or 300 years? Why is that finally, what the Buddha says, old age and sickness will come to me. So if God is protecting my health, why is my health then finally finishing out after a timeline? That doesn't make sense to me. And he said, beta, tum bade hoge, tum samjhoge. But that is not an answer which worked for me. Or if in something as simple as a arti, if we incessantly end it with Sukh Sampati Gharaye, Kasht Mite Tanka. ठीक है स्वामी जी, बट सुख संपत्ति तो यूरोप में, अमेरिका में हमसे बहुत ज्यादा है, वो तो ये आरती नहीं कर रहे हैं, हम रोज कर रहे हैं, बट वी आर नॉट रिच इनफ. हाउ डज दिस वर्क? हाउ कैन दिस बी द रिलीजन? एंड देन आई रीड विवेकानंद, and he talks about a shopkeeper's religion, a beggar's religion, which is a trade-off. God, give me this, I will do this for you. God, you are so kind, give me this. That is not liberation, that is using God as a tool of acquisition. So between the straitjacketing of conventional religion and the overt coolness of atheism and say God is nothing, Vivekananda taught me the ability to be a cynical religion individual, to be a questioner and say, I will find my answers. And then from 15 till 45, 30 years, whenever I have heard about religion, or I have heard people talk about religion, and I have two minds, I always say, whoever is talking to me about religion today, has he seen God? Because Vivekananda asked his guru this question, if you're talking to me about God, have you seen God? And Ramakrishna said to him, yes, I have seen God. And that's the only man who ever gave that answer. So Vivekananda is the only man who has learned from somebody who's actually seen God. Other than that, anybody gives me too much gyan, I say, how are you more qualified than I am, by the way? You haven't seen him, I haven't seen him. So you have a theory, I have a theory, we are equals. So Vivekananda lets you work in an aggressive way. He lets you find your questions and your answers. But is this only philosophy? Does it not change your everyday living? I think it does. And for people in school, you might get this point. Class 11th is when I'm my unsure self, I'm my ambiguous self, I'm my scared self. And in our school, I was in Kendriya Vidyalaya. Uh, the, the house captains were from class 12th and the house vice captains for class 11th. But we had an election pool of some 60 students who would do that. My teachers forced me to stand for house vice captain in 11th, house vice captain. The electoral poll was 60. I got 3 votes. I began to read Vivekananda that year randomly. The next year, for a lark, I stood for the school captain. And from that pool of 60, I think I got 46 votes. So the transition is actual if you want to live it. It's not just about nation building, it's about the point of outgrowing the fear of random things and what will these people say to me, all of that universe. So he moves you and he makes you understand that this bothering about the loss of things, the loss of honor, the loss of respect, it is something that you need to outgrow. And this I have kept for 20, 30 years on my workstation. This I have seen in life. He who is overcautious about himself falls into dangers at every step. He who is overcautious about himself falls into dangers at every step. He who is afraid of losing honor and respect gets only disgrace. He who is afraid of loss always loses. So when I have a work decision, when I have a family decision, when I have a monetary decision, if I'm afraid of loss, I know I will inevitably lose. Ergo, I stop having the fear and I let things be. That is his emotional, mental indoctrination of my mind for 35 odd years. And that is why when I say he's somebody for everyday living, that we misread him when we think that his relevance is confined to the world of the saffron clad. His relevance is every single day in your school, in your college, in your job, in your driving, in your irritation with things. Remember what he says and he will calm you down. He'll give you a structure to live by. How much is left, Swamiji? But the second part I wanted to make a very small point about, because there's a lot that can be said about him, but I wanted to summarize one thing. As I grew up, religion began to be seen, I think, inherently as something which we wear with slightly more pride on our sleeves. And religion began to be equated a lot across the world with the symbolism of religion, with what you do, and how you worship and where you worship. And whenever anybody asked me for a viewpoint about those things, I always went back to one thing, which is Kheer Bhawani. Now, Kheer Bhawani is a temple outside of Srinagar, for those of you who are aware. And I grew up in J&K, so when I read Vivekananda had gone to Amarnath, I also went to Amarnath to see what it was. Then I read that he went to Kheer Bhawani after Amarnath, so I wanted to go there, and I read up about it. And there's something which happened there which I think has shaped my mind on this topic for 25, 30 years with no ambiguity. So Vivekananda goes to Kheer Bhawani, so he writes, and this is in the talks with his disciples, and he found that the temple was not in a very good shape at what the point he went after Amarnath. So he went there for a week and he worked around the temple, he cleaned up things, and one day he said that I felt that this temple should have been in a better condition, that some ruler had come from somewhere and destroyed some part of it, had not been rebuilt and it was in a bad shape. And he said, if I was alive when this happened, I would never have let it happen. I would have protected mother. He said this to himself, apparently. And then he tells his disciples, mother spoke to me. A voice of the mother spoke to me. And she said, it is my wish that I live here in this dilapidated building. If I wanted, could I not erect a 7-story temple of gold here at this very moment? Will you protect me or will I protect you? And then Swamiji says, from that moment I gave up all grand plans. It is her world, it is her wish, it goes as she wants to. So from that moment I have remembered that we, specks on this timeline of this planet, should remember we are not here to defend God. We are too inconsequential. We can barely defend ourselves. We should let God defend us and not try to change the power equation, because that's not the way it is meant to be played. And lastly, I will stay within the timeline, so 5 more minutes. About 5, 6, 8 years back, I wrote a small piece in the TOI with the headline, Why I Don't Follow Vivekanand Anymore. And given that the culture in India is to read the headline, not read the story, I got a lot of hate mail. You ungrateful man, finally you have outgrown the true anchor of your life, and what are you trying to do? So I said, please read the piece. It's a small piece. I'd want to read it out for you. There is one index I have used in the past few years, mostly in my 40s, to get a sense of whether or not I have understood anything of Vivekananda's teachings. And that is whether my frequency of referring to him is reducing. I first realized this was happening in the course of the pieces I wrote about him in the last 15, 20 years. The tone kept changing over time. As a writer, that caused me and a potential publisher some distress, because to come back to a topic is easy if you're thinking the same way when you wrote the first draft. But as an individual, that change, the disconnect to things I had connected to earlier, the diminishing of the need to refer to guidance, that gradual shift was very educative. And when I understood later, it was a bit of growing up. And as I saw it happening, I acknowledged and I appreciated the brilliance of Vivekananda as a teacher. Throughout his life, he explained that the point of lives of the incarnations, like the young colleagues who were here earlier said, that to talk about Buddha and Christ is not about worshipping their personality, but about absorbing their lives, about seeing them as people who lived a path and showed us how to live it. Vivekananda worshipped Ramakrishna unquestioningly after he doubted him intensely. To quote him, let none regret that they were difficult to convince. I fought my master for 6 years with the result that I know every inch of the way. Every inch of the way. Vivekananda shied away from asking the world to accept Ramakrishna's personality or from creating a sect. He questioned everything, everyone, and recurrently and sharply slammed the reflex of unthinking obedience to a cause, a belief, or a person, no matter how great. He trashed mindless adherence to rituals or practices merely because they had been practiced for centuries. He was not God-fearing. Indeed, he did not think that you could get anywhere close to God if you were the fearing sort of person. He was also anything but a believer in the wisdom of numbers. Quote unquote, what you call the majority is mainly composed of fools and men of common intellect. Men who have brains to think for themselves are few everywhere, is hardly less than political correctness. On some days, he was gentle and compared the masses to children who have yet to understand things. On other days, he was sharper and less forgiving of common intellect. Vivekananda did not look to make followers. He did not take pride in his master being venerated only as individuals. Through what he said over and over, he reiterated, do not worship an idea, a teacher, or a master, however great, unquestioningly. Do not accept an idea or a practice, no matter how popular and how ancient, unquestioningly. Stand not with folded hands and bowed heads before either the grandeur of personality or the pressure of popular opinion, is what Vivekananda says to me through the story of his life. Think for yourself. And so, as time went by, I realized that the more I followed him and subconsciously absorbed pieces of his thought, the more the idea of following began to seem not something to aspire for. By absorbing what Vivekananda is hammering into my mind day after day, without being conscious, I learned to not blindly believe in unquestioned truths. I learned to stay cynical, to not be God-fearing, but to find the idea of being afraid of God a very petty one. From this man of God, I learned to blindly not trust the word of wisdom of any man of God. And almost imperceptibly, I realized that the less blindly I hero worshipped him, the greater was his victory in transforming my thoughts. Small minds, fragile egos, and little leaders need that every word of theirs be unquestionably worshipped. But the evolved mind of a true leader looks to go beyond the master-servant bond. It looks to engage with you as an equal, to have you think for yourself and leave the final call to you, as Krishna did with Arjun. And so now, being a follower of the monk, hands folded, is not my primary instinct anymore, because age is catching up, and I'm increasingly captivated by the drama and flamboyance of Vivekananda's thought. The older I grow, the more everything seems to me to lie in manliness. This is my new gospel. Do even evil like a man. Be wicked if you must, on a grand scale. And so, the older I grow, the more everything about following Vivekananda seems to lie in understanding the probing, challenging, and questioning message of his life, not in just being a disciple, not being a clerical follower of his writings. I have begun to think that perhaps the only way to truly follow Vivekananda is to, over time, outgrow the reflex of following itself and to think for yourself. That's it. Thank you.